Welcome to Brand for Good, the show for purpose-driven leaders who want to build timeless brands and create sustainable impact. I'm Lorraine Sugart, former PR and marketing executive turned founder of the disruptive agency Prosper for Purpose. I've worked with some of the world's most beloved brands, and I'm here to help you elevate your brand identity, visibility, influence, and impact. Are you ready to brand for good? Let's go. Welcome back to Brand for Good, where today my guest is Amy Posner. Amy is a growth mentor for creative freelancers. But before going into her current role, she was actually an entrepreneur with a variety of different businesses. So we're going to delve into what she does for creatives and what she did before. So Amy Posner, welcome to Brand for Good. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Thanks. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. So tell us a little bit about your work mentoring. And I love the word mentor. I look at so much better than coaching or so many of the other terms that are out there. But tell me what that means to you and how you kind of fulfill that role through your business.
Well, interestingly, and I owned a creative freelancing business as a copywriter for a long time. And I was a coach before that. But what I've seen, particularly in the freelance space, is freelancers who are excellent at their craft, but don't have business skills, just don't eat as well as mediocre craftspeople who have business chops. And so I turned my business to helping people develop those business skills so that they could, actually thrive in their businesses. Because I found like if you don't do that, you can very easily turn the thing you love into a thing that you hate. People start these businesses because they're good at something. They're passionate about it. They want to serve people, help people. But it can get very frustrating and very feast and famine-y if you don't know how to run the business properly. So that's where the impetus came from.
I love that. Tell me a little bit about when you had a copywriting business. Were you someone who started your business already having the business skills, or are you someone who had to figure it out as you went?
Well, it's a funny thing. No, I had the business skills. I've been a serial entrepreneur, I'd say, for 30 years. And I also grew up in a family business.
Wow.
So my business roots are pretty deep. I didn't necessarily want to be a business person. That's another story. But no, I had the business skills. Interestingly, though, my issue when I started a copywriting business was I didn't know who bought what I sold. And I discovered that there's a whole strata of clients and different people who pay different rates for different things. And that was sort of the thing that I had to unlock in order to make that work for me. But I knew how to work with people. I knew how to write proposals. I knew a bit about pricing, all of those things I had. But there were definitely some mysteries involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't think anyone starts a business ever with just hitting it out of the park and knowing exactly what to do. I think fast growth can be a problem as much as slow growth. So tell me a little bit about your copywriting business and what you liked about, or just in general, what did you like about being an entrepreneur and what made you decide that you wanted to kind of start a business as a mentor to other creatives?
Well, the thing that I love about business, and it's funny because I said I didn't want to be a business person because I wanted to be a creative person. My family was in business and, I studied visual arts and I thought that would be my path. And I became an accidental entrepreneur. And what I discovered was it was super creative. It was really interesting. You would invent things and try them out. And if they worked, you'd have success and then you'd adjust and tweak. And I loved that. I really loved that process. I was actually a partner, one of the businesses I owned, I was a partner in a coaching business. It had a very limited scope though. And I had a foot in that when I started my copywriting business. And how I evolved from that into the mentorship is people were coming to me and asking me, you seem to be successful, things are working for you, you've got good clients. I did some speaking engagements, so people got to know me a little bit. And there was like, what's the secret? And can you help me figure this out for myself? And then coincidentally, at that same time, someone had invited me to be a coach in one of their programs that had a lot of people in it. So I kind of got known, sort of in a side capacity at the same time. And that evolved into, what I said about wanting people to learn the business skills so they could actually do the thing that they loved and do it effectively. So that's a little bit how that evolved.
I love that. And so on your website, you talk about the spin, about, kind of starting a business because you have a creative passion for design or writing or whatever, and then being caught up in the whirlwind of all the other things you have to know and orchestrate in order to be able to do what you want to do. So, can you talk a little bit about that? And when people come to you, are they typically stuck in one particular area, or is it that it's everything that they didn't really anticipate they'd have to do, from marketing and sales to managing their business finances and paying themselves, which I know is a huge issue for a lot of creatives? Can you talk a little bit about that? Where are people?
It really varies. I tend to not work so much with brand new people. That's just how it's evolved. So they're usually people who have made a thing work, but they haven't made it work optimally. And, why I talk about the spin is I find what happens, there's so many decisions to make. And, there's so many people to follow and ways to do things. And so people make a decision and then they get a little bit down the path and they're like, wait, but like, should I do it this way or that way? Or what about what this person's doing? And, what about this? And you can get stuck in a very long time in that position, but in like various departments of your business, right? It's like, oh, I'm stuck here with marketing. I'm stuck with pricing, but wait, what do I do with clients? And so there's a lot of cobbled together things where people feel like, it could fall apart at any moment, right? And so my thing is like, let's look at all the areas and let's just figure out what makes logical sense for you. I'm very much about a business that works for you, because like a lot of people, there's this ideal of, 100K and that's the goal.
Yeah.
And for some people, that's the goal. For some people, it's not the goal. Some people, it's like, hey, I want to work part-time and raise my kids and I want to make good money doing it. For some people, it's, I want to make 3 times that and I don't know how to do it. And so I'm very much about helping people figure out what I call what's theirs to do. And then let's look at what I'm sort of referring to as departments. Let's look at these various departments and see where do you have skills and talents? Because I'm a fan of getting out of your comfort zone, but not so far out of it that you won't do the thing.
I love that.
So let's push you right up to it and maybe a little beyond it. And then we can work with that from there. But that's what it means to me to like figure out what's yours to do. Because it's not going to be what works for you or for me. It's going to be what works for that person, which may be some hybrid of that. But I'm just very clear that we have to take each person where they are and see what is it that they want to achieve? And okay, what are the pathways to that?
That's great. I love that, because it's certainly not a cookie cutter approach. Just because you're a creative doesn't mean you're going to follow the same steps as another creative, because maybe you already have some skills in one or more areas, but there's one that's just kind of like sucking you in and you just can't get out of it.
Yeah. Or even the idea, I was just talking with someone yesterday who felt like she had to be on all the channels. Like, I've got to be over here and I've got to be on Instagram and I have to be on LinkedIn and I have to be doing this. And then like, should I be on podcasts and should I be speaking? And it's like, you can't do all of these things effectively and certainly not at once. But I think people don't get that. And they feel like they're running around, spinning around all these things, but they're not completing any of them or doing any of them really well. They're doing all of them sort of halfway, not intentionally. They just don't know.
Yeah.
So, like just that as an example.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I think there's a lot of that out there. People look at the leaders in their particular industry, not realizing that that person has a team, that they're not actually the ones posting on 5 social platforms 5 times a day. And it takes a lot of the pressure off when you can realize, okay, that may be where you are in 10 years, and it may be not. It depends on the business that you're trying to grow. And let's focus on where your people are and do that effectively. And then you can grow from there. So I do know that you work with people a couple of different ways. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I work with people in a one-on-one capacity as a mentor. The thing I love is running small group programs. So I do that. I have something called the Freelancer Lab. I've run masterminds before, and they weren't so focused on the business skills because I was working with a lot of copywriters. So there would be some copy mentorship and business. Now I work with all kinds of creative freelancers and I get a really interesting mix. And the fun thing about that is people see things so differently from different disciplines, and everyone can get this like lovely soup of, oh, that's how you do proposals in web design? Huh, who knew? And they apply it over here. And I work with coaches. And so I love that work. And I also run a membership where that's sort of a lower barrier to entry. There's, more people in that. It's not a dozen people kind of a thing. It's a bigger universe, but it's a great place that people can, sort of get their grounding and learn what they need to learn and learn at their own pace, but also have that, I hesitate to say community because it's such an overused word in so many ways, but like, I have to say, it feels like the magic that I've been able to create is curating groups where people just benefit from the other people in the group, where people are kind and generous with their knowledge and, there to learn and also, to give and to get. And that's what drives me. I love that. I love being in those spaces. I love seeing people grow and achieve goals and actually get results and go, this works. It's finally making sense to me. That's what drives me.
And seeing one person make it and do really well tells you that if they can do it, you can do it too. So I think those communities are so important. I keep coming back. I keep reading that people are lonely around the world, but especially in the United States, it seems people have high reports of being lonely. We feel disconnected. And certainly entrepreneurs, I mean, we're a breed of our own, right? Whether you are a freelancer, you have a business, you have employees, entrepreneurs are a lonely bunch too, because nobody really gets it. If you're sitting down at the Thanksgiving dinner table and you're saying, I'm so excited, I spent all day writing this sales page and it's finally right, people are going to go like, okay, yeah, that's great, right? Nobody gets it. But if you're in a community of other people who are working on the same things and you say, I spent 6 hours on this sales page. I'm so excited, but please give me honest feedback. You're going to have just an outpouring in most groups, I believe, of people just being generous and saying, I really love this. Did you think about that? And it's invaluable. Like you can't really put a value on that and say what it's worth because you're not just talking about what it's worth to your business. You're talking about what it's worth to your psyche.
That is such a good point. And it's one of those things that's hard to describe. I mean, we can talk about this all day long, but until someone gets in that situation, like you almost don't get it, but you can see like a visible, like sigh of relief, like my people, they speak my language.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you're saying. And it's funny with copywriting because you say that to the relatives and they're like, I didn't know you were a lawyer. You do copyright things.
Oh, that's
like,
so funny.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. My family has known since I was young, like I'm going to be writing. Whatever I do, I'm going to be writing. And it's funny because for a long time, I didn't really call myself a copywriter. And, now I just say, depending on who you're talking to, right? Some people know right away, but other people don't. But, a lot of times I say I do strategy and storytelling. And that's kind of the crux of my sweet spot. And then I have a specific kind of client that I work with as well. Tell me a little bit about your brand and how it's evolved. You and I, right before we hopped on, well, almost right before we talked about our pets, but we talked a lot about your brand ultimately is your reputation. And, if you develop a bad reputation in one area, it's not like you can set down that reputation and start over, very rarely. So your reputation follows you from the time you're employed to the time you start your business, but you've done a variety of things. Can you talk to our listeners a little bit about how you brought your brand forward and how it evolved without completely changing, right? And the good things you were able to bring along. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%
Okay.
it does. No, it does. It makes sense. And for me, it's really simple. I've always really, really liked customer service and delivering an amazing experience. And so whatever business I've been in, it's this sort of client handholding and making sure people understand what's going to happen, really good communication, delivering really good value. And there's a price for that, right? I mean, there are different sort of strata or class of clients. And I was always interested in working with clients who understood what I offered and wanted that kind of an experience and were willing to pay for that value. So that's something that's sort of seen me through everything that I've done. And more recently, I've really made an effort to have a brand that's associated with kindness, which is an interesting thing in the mentoring space because there's a lot of people who are they feel like in order to be good, you have to be critical and you have to be direct and you have to almost be harsh. And I think there's a way to be direct and be really kind. It's a vulnerable position. Like you were saying before, we're sort of isolated, we're sort of alone. And it's hard to, admit that you don't know what you don't know. And, when somebody opens themselves up for coaching, for mentoring, I feel like it's my job to be direct and be clear and help them see what they can't see. But, to do it in a way that's kind and where people feel seen and heard and not so criticized. I mean, you can be critical without criticizing, and I like to bring a critical eye and I like to shine a light on what's not working, but like in an encouraging way. And it's part of my brand. And in fact, I was talking to a coaching client yesterday who's like, well, it's my job to make sure I make the best of this experience and that I get the coaching work done. And I said, yeah, it's your job, but it's also my job, right? Because for me, you getting results is what makes me successful. I don't just want your money and like hope you go off and do the work. It's like, I want to see you get what you wanted out of this engagement. And to that end, I feel like I have responsibilities in that. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
I really love that because I think that in the world of, let's just call it mentoring, there's programs, there's courses, there's small group coaching, all of that. I think there is too much focus on getting the next client and not taking really good care of the client you have.
Yeah. I mean, I have people I'm still in touch with from masterminds I ran 5 and 6 years ago. And the thing I love even more, they're still in groups with each other.
I love that. That's so good. Yeah.
Those are their business besties. That's who they're hanging with. That's who they're going to for advice and to run things by. And, and some of those groups I drop in or I get invited to drop in occasionally. But like, that's what I mean about like curating these groups where people are connected and they're getting value. And that, that just makes me really happy.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I really like that. What kind of, I guess, entrepreneurs or creatives, I should say, creative freelancers. So when you say creative freelancers, are these people who are one-person shops, or do they ever have employees, or how do you kind of define the container of people that you serve?
Yeah, it's a great question. Usually not employees, but often teams. And a lot of times they're sort of contracted teams or outsourced teams, a lot of solos, but usually people who are a little further along in their business have other support members, sometimes even like in what I call like the micro agency sense, where they might have people who are doing the key deliverable that they're selling, with that person's input. So, and it could be a solo, could be someone, who's, that's what they're doing. They may have like a virtual assistant or some kind of support like that. And again, that comes back to the what's right for them. Some people are like, oh, if I could have a team and I could do this and I could, do these pieces, I'd be in heaven. And some people are like, oh my God, like just leave me alone in my cave. And I'm so happy.
Yeah.
Right. So a whole range of people. And I'll say this too. I think the freelancer label's been a little tarnished. There's a lot of association with freelancers being flaky. And so I try and use that really carefully. And I try and make sure that people feel comfortable inside of that label. And I often like to transition. I kind of feel like the mindset is from freelancer to business owner. And you're doing the same work. It's just you're thinking about yourself a little bit differently, right? And you're less at the, I don't know, sort of beck and call or the whims of the marketplace. You have a strong positioning and then you move out from there instead of this idea of sort of like you're, whether or not you have choice in this, you have agency in this, like every client's not a fit. We find out who the clients are for you. And so I don't know, I see that as a bit of a differentiator. I just tell you a quick story. I'll never forget. I was when I first started copywriting and I was at it was a bank opening and it was a very highfalutin kind of crowd. And, we were doing cocktails and, mingling. And this guy said to me, what do you do? And I explained what I did. And he said, oh, you're a freelancer? And I said, I was kind of taken aback and I was like, I guess. And he's like, oh, I see. And he, like, you could see he just moved right on to the next person. And that was a real wake up call for me. I was like, okay, we need to like change this perception.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Would you say that's one of we always talk about hills we're willing to die on. And, I had mine for a very long time and I still have it, but I don't focus on it quite as much. What are the hills that you would die on, I guess, regarding what you do and how you perceive the perceptions of people looking in from the outside.
I think that's it. It's the how you see yourself and like sort of what you're entitled to and what you're carving out and who you are and who you stand for. And that you have that right and maybe even that responsibility. I mean, to yourself at least. I feel really strongly about that and kind of creating a self identity that's, I mean, not immutable. I don't think anything necessarily is, but
Right.
that you can stand really strong in. I think that's really important and not to be defined by how you're perceived or how you might be perceived. Yeah, that's one for sure.
That's so interesting. So this morning I was on a call and we were talking about how to evolve your business to take things to the next level, that you have to become a different version of you. Like you have to step into the next, I guess, era or elevation of being. So the person that was freelancing odd jobs in college, for example, needs to become a different person if they're going to start a business doing whatever that freelance job was and learn actual business skills, because now it's just not supplemental income, it's what they're surviving on. So I guess this brings me to a really question that I've been waiting to ask you, which is, can you give me an example of a student story or even a collective experience that you've seen your students go through, from who they are when they join one of your programs or your mentoring, and who they become, how they exit, what that looks like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of it is identifying for them, like who they stand for and who they want to be and who they want to serve. Because I think the idea that I think people, again, they feel like they're sort of at the mercy of the market.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times in the freelance world or the small business world, people feel like clients are adversaries a little bit. They show up, they want a thing and they want it for the best price possible. And I believe what the good clients are really looking for is a partner and somebody, a strategic partner and somebody who can deliver value. And a lot of times I think people really are hung up on pricing and positioning and how they see themselves. And so one of the things that I think, they come in a little bit shaky, like, could I really ask that much money? And is it worth it? And am I worth it? And, well, what about, the people over here who are charging this? And it's a funny world, right? Because like you can find someone who is paying 3,000 for a website and someone who's paying 30,000. Like, is it the
Yes.
contractor? Is it the client? And so I think, sort of in the whirl of, you come in and the work you're doing and then coming out the other side, I think it's figuring that out. Like, what is your positioning? Who do you stand for? And very often it's interesting, people don't give themselves credit for the other experiences that they've had in life or in business or in the work world, right? Because now I'm this and everything, it becomes this very narrow focus. And in fact, I talk about like being what I call a double or triple threat. So say you're a copywriter, if you're a copywriter who works in finance and you have a degree in finance, well, other people in finance are going to respect that because they're going to understand that you get them. And so like, let's pull from what you've done. Let's create this sort of broader picture of who you are and what you can do. Like, funny story, I had a client I worked with for years who has a PhD. And he was very shy about talking about having a PhD to clients. And it was sort of like, well, why would I bring that up? And it's braggy and all that. And it's like, no, it says something about you. Like, we all know that means A, you're smart, B, you persist, C, you've got something that most people don't have. And it took a while for him to see that or be willing to sort of project himself through that lens, if you will.
Yeah.
And once he did, people were like, oh, well, you do? Oh, they really stood up and paid attention because it has value. That's one of the things I just see all the time. So it's like, let's look at what you're really made of here and like what you really bring to the table. And people are, often quite surprised to see that, like, oh, I'm just not this little narrow definition. And maybe you don't have that much experience here, but you have a whole lot of experience elsewhere. Well, that all combines into who you are and what your clients want to know about you and how you can serve them. So
100%. No, I love that so much. And it's funny, I use the example when I help people think about their brand stories and their positioning as well. And I remember I worked with a small business owner, And he was like, well, that's it. I'm really boring, da 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 da. And I said, well, tell me about your childhood. And he's like, well, I lived in like 5 different countries before I went to high school. And I was like, stop the presses. Like, that's huge. Let's talk about that. You've lived in different cultures. You've had these different life experiences. How could that not affect your perspective in the work that you do? And it also makes you really more interesting, right? And he was like, well, that was just my life. And I think we're all that way to some extent. That's just my life. That's no big deal. And when someone else can kind of bring that back up and mirror it back to you and say, yeah, that's super cool. And it's very interesting and will make people really feel like they know you better. And isn't that what we're trying to do? So I love that. I think humility is a great thing until it gets in the way of you being able to make a living or doing what you want to do. So I like to tell my clients humility is overrated. Like there's a point where you don't have to be a braggart about it, but you need to be able to say, this is my expertise and these are some of the experiences that I've had.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point because I think that's where you have to get to in order to have some success. You need to be able to see yourself as the expert and really own that and own your expertise and, how good you are at a thing. I mean, you wouldn't be doing this if you didn't think that you were good at it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's fundamentally true. But sometimes you have to bring people around to seeing that. And that's one of the things I also love as a mentor. I get to see inside of a lot of people's business. So I can give you perspective because I know this is not a secret. I mean, we know this, right? We're all human. We all have our, our frailties and all of the things, but we tend to see everyone else's strengths and our own weaknesses. And so I like to be able to reflect back to people what I see and where they fit, relative to what's happening in the market space or in the world at large. And,
Right.
yeah, I think that's really important.
I love that so much. So take a second and brag a little, non-bragging, brag about yourself. Tell people what you'd like them to know about you if they were meeting you for the first time.
And that's a good question. I think in the context like a business is kind of what I said already. I'm kind. I'm very good at elevating up and seeing the big picture. And people are often surprised, like they can spend an hour with me and like I can take apart what they've got and like see what they can do and how they can improve it, how they can position themselves. And I didn't realize that was a superpower, right? It's like, oh, well, that's just what I do.
Right.
But like after doing it repetitively, I realized that it's something that I can do really quickly and really easily. And I have ideas. I mean, I can see, I was coaching someone yesterday and she kind of, brought her bag of problems, let's say, or concerns. And I was like, well, have you thought of doing it this way or doing that way? Or what if you did this? And she was like, you could see visibly, she was sort of blown back. Like, you've taken all this angst that I've had and all these things I've been stewing on for so long, and you've given me productive ways to go out in the marketplace or make this work or see what would be attractive to my clients. And it's funny because I think in that context, what I see a lot too, because I mentioned superpower, I think what happens for us a lot is the things that come easily to us, we tend to dismiss, right? Like, oh, anybody could do
100%.
that, or who would value
Yes.
that? And in fact, it's often your superpower because it's the thing you're really good at and it's the thing you can do pretty quickly. And business time is money, right? So if there's something that you're laboring over and it takes you a really long time, you make less money than something you can do, quickly and repeatedly. So anyway, yeah, I think that's what I would say in my braggy permission to brag way.
And what's something interesting about you personally?
I've lived a lot of places.
That's
I have
cool.
traveled a lot. Where I live now, I've been like the longest time I've ever been. My mom used to say when she couldn't fall asleep, she would try and remember all the places I lived, and she'd never get through them all before she'd fall asleep. So I traveled a lot. I'm pretty adventurous. I'm not risk adverse. I don't know if it's my age at this point, but like I just don't get wound up about a lot of stuff. Tech winds me up sometimes. That tech makes me sweat sometimes. But
well, when the thing that's supposed to make your life easier makes it more difficult, then I think most of us just kind of go off. I know I do. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I do. I feel like I'm pretty good at it, but when it doesn't work, I just get really uneasy. But, generally, I just like things kind of roll off. I don't get too wound up about stuff. It just isn't worth it. And I'll just say one more thing about that. My dad brought us up with this You have to have positive mental attitude. He was always talking about PMA. And I thought it was kind of like corny dad, cheesy stuff. And, it turned out my dad really lived that. And he was so unflappable and just so cool about things. And I feel like I've embodied some of that. Like, I think it was drilled into me so for so many years. I don't know that I'm a cockeyed optimist. I think far from it, but I feel like there's always a way to work things out, I guess is what comes
Make
from
the
that.
best of things,
Yeah.
right? And you don't
Yeah.
let it bring you down, which is also resilience. And we know how important that is.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is resilience. I like that word. I'm going to use that. Yeah, resilience.
Yeah. So, Amy, this has been such a great conversation. Before I let you go, can you tell people where they can find you and learn more about how they might work with you if they're creative?
Absolutely. You can find me at my website. It's amyposner.com, AMYPOSNER, just like it sounds. And there's all the options on there. One of the things, I put out a weekly newsletter that's all my best stuff. In fact, someone said to me this morning, you have to subscribe to this. This is one of the only ones I like. I know it's coming Saturday morning, and that's what I have my coffee with. And it's
good.
It's free. And that's a great way to connect with me. I also have a product called Complete Breakthrough Freelancer, which you can find on my site. I have a whole video about it and how it works, but it's sort of my mastermind in a box, but it also comes with the ability to talk to me and get advice from me and get feedback from me. Because I found that that's a key component of actually using something, because there's a lot of courses out there that end up in the dustbin because you get to a certain point and you're like, I don't know, well, what do I do? And how do I implement this for me? So inside of it, well, you ask me and I can give you an answer. And, this is a perfect sort of full circle, because you were talking about me talking about the spin. And I feel like that's how I put my hands on your shoulders and stop you spinning and point you in a forward direction. So there you have it.
That's wonderful. A great note to end on. So Amy Posner, thank you so much for being my guest today on Brand for Good. And everyone, Amy's information and a link to her website will be in our show notes.
Thank you so much.
Great having you here. Thank you so much for tuning into the Brand for Good show. If you like what you heard, please hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode, and leave a review so other purpose-driven leaders can find this valuable content. To learn more about building a brand for good, please visit prosperforpurpose.com for more resources and information on all the ways you can work with us.